I found something humorous for you this morning, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, right. There you go. It's a story about a lady that was in a department store, and she was standing in line waiting to pay for her items. And as she stood there, she was kind of impatient, and so she was watching people around her. She got on her phone, she started texting, she started going through Facebook. And pretty soon she realized she'd been standing there for 15 minutes, and the line hadn't even moved. And so she was getting kind of agitated, and she shouted up at the cashier, "Is this line going to take all day?" And the cashier replied, "Well, ma'am, please, come on up to the counter." So the frustrated customer did. She walks up there and she says to the cashier, "Well, I don't want to cut in front of these other gentlemen that I was behind. I just don't understand why the line isn't moving." "Well, ma'am," the cashier began to answer, "I don't think that they're going to mind. Actually, that's our clothing display, and you are standing behind 3 mannequins." All right, well, so there you go. Here's our morning humor. We're continuing in this series called Turn Up the Heat. And what does it look like in our spiritual journey for 2018 to take it up a notch, to go an extra mile, to work a little bit harder, to serve the Lord a little bit better, to grow in your spiritual disciplines, or to be more consistent, more committed, whatever it might mean for you. Is God challenging you? Is God leading you? Is God calling to you in any way to take your spiritual journey up a notch, to turn up the heat, so to speak? We've been talking about a couple of different topics so far. We talked about, in fact, put them up there because I didn't write them down. I don't remember what they are. So we want to stand up, which is about strengthening our faith, how to stand strong in faith in a culture that's making that difficult, or that we may have a tendency just to wander. Number 2 was that we want to step up. Take responsibility. What gifts, what opportunities, what talents has God given to you, and how can you use those for His glory? And today we're going to talk about how to speak up. And that's just some thoughts this morning on how can we share Christ? How can we share Jesus? How can we take that up a notch? Be a little bit more committed, a little more serious. Maybe take a risk and share your faith with somebody else that might need it. This is such a large topic. I mean, entire books and sermon series, and this is a large topic. And to be honest, probably for many of us, it feels overwhelming. I hope today, even though we'll take maybe a simple look, I hope we find some tangible tools that will help us to be able to share our faith in Christ in the world around us. Do you think the world around us might need Christ? Thinking of, like Grayson mentioned that song Chain Breaker, and the video that he's been watching, it just represents somebody that is struggling, is lost, is hurting, is, people in the world around us, they're in a prison of pain, a prison of addiction, prisons of hurt, prisons of sin. And through Christ, they can be set free. Through Christ, they can be given a new life. Through Christ, they can be given a better way. We believe that. We live for that. That's why we come every week to hear more about what God is doing around us and in us, and how He wants to do that work in our lives. What a glorious opportunity it is to be able to share that with somebody else. But how? We're going to consider 2 questions. Why and how? Why should we share our faith? And then perhaps the question of how do we do that? But first, we'll ask something about the why. We'll look at the why. Why is it important to share your faith? I admit there is a social awkwardness in trying to engage somebody about Jesus Christ. I'm not saying they feel socially awkward. I'm saying I feel socially awkward. I admit that. I recognize that. It is not always a natural conversation to have. It is not always an easy conversation, especially in a cultural challenges that we face. And so what's really easy for me to do, I think what's really easy for anyone to do, is say, well, I go to church, I give to charity, I study the scriptures, I stand on truth. Isn't that enough? Isn't it enough just to, I'm doing all these things? You know, what's the big deal about sharing my faith as well? I love, we're in this gospel band, and we go out and do concerts once in a while at some parks, some festivals, some retirement homes, places like that. John, our leader, he one time says, it's so much easier just to stay in the salt shaker. Bible says we're the salt of the earth, but it's so much more comfortable in the shaker than it is getting poured out in the world. That's a little harder. That's a little bit more, that's where the risk happens. So let's challenge this. Why? Why should we? Why is it important for us to get out and share our faith? I'm going to give you an assignment to go back and later today and read Luke chapter 15. Now we'll read from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, I think. Chapter 2 in a minute. But so I'm just going to kind of briefly summarize what happens in Luke chapter 15 as Jesus talking and teaching about the necessity, the importance of why we should go out and share our faith. In Luke 15, he gives 3 parables, 3 quick stories or illustrations that talk about this. And they may be rather familiar stories to you, perhaps. So this real kind of in rapid succession, he gives these 3 stories. Let me summarize them to you, and then you can go back and read them on your own. And we'll glean some things from this. There's first a story about a shepherd that loses his sheep. And so the shepherd spends all night long searching and out looking for the sheep until it's found and is able to bring it back. The second story is about a woman who has 10 pieces of silver, and one of them goes missing. And Jesus says, wouldn't the woman take and clear all the furniture and move everything and sweep the entire house until that piece is found? And then the third story is about the prodigal son. The son who asks his father for his inheritance early so he can go off and live a life of pleasure and luxury in the world. In the end of which he finds that it had nothing to offer him, and he finds that he has nothing left but hunger and despair and brokenness. He decides to return home, and his father throws this grand feast to celebrate his son's homecoming. Now those are the 3 stories. Again, you probably one or maybe all of them are familiar. But there's some things that I want us to glean from those about what Jesus is trying to say in these and why it's important for us to learn how to share our faith. The first is that the mission matters to God. In each story, someone goes into action. Because something has been lost. Something important needs to happen. They don't just sit around, but they go into action. The shepherd goes looking for his sheep. The woman sweeps the entire house. There's even indication of the story of the father that he goes out to the end of the driveway every day looking to see if this was a day his son would come home. They go into action. We recognize that God went into action and didn't just leave us stranded. God is a sending God. He sent his son into the world, and God is also sending us out into the world to share the message of the son. The Bible says that while we were yet sinners, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Before we earned it, before we deserved it, before anything else, before we even really knew what we needed, God took the initiative. God went into the world. It's so easy to abandon the mission that God has set before us and just be comfortable with the life that we live or comfortable with where we're at. Think of it from this point of view. Think of a lifeguard that's given the responsibility of watching over a section of the beach. And he is there for a few different reasons. He might offer some help and some guidance to somebody that's lost. He's also there to help kind of protect the people that are in his field of view. He's there to serve them in any way that might be needed. He is responsible for everyone that's out in his section of the beach. If we consider that, there's a few things that we can recognize as we have been called to be lifeguards in the beach that's in front of us. One, you're not responsible for all the beach. You're only responsible for your section of the beach, your part that you're to look at, your part where you're assigned, your part where you can work. Sometimes this idea of evangelism, sometimes this idea of sharing our faith seems so overwhelming because we look at the whole world and think it's too much. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. How can I impact anybody? And we need to recognize we're only called to look at our section of the beach. Other people try. Other people think that the whole world is their beach. And everywhere they go, every person they meet, every situation they're in, everything, every need that comes up is their responsibility to rescue. That's not true either. We're only called to provide care over our section of the beach. Well, how do we do that? Well, using that illustration again, we can recognize a couple things. One, that the mission is important. If you are set out there to watch the beach, what you do is so vital. You can provide protection and rescue to those that might come into trouble. What if the lifeguard sat around and said, let them drown, I'm eating a sandwich? But unfortunately, as Christians, with our beach to watch, don't we say that in some way or another? Oh, I'm too busy. Oh, I don't know what to do. Oh, I got my own problems. Lord, help us to see that the mission's important, and we've been called and given the responsibility of rescue. And so let us not be overwhelmed. Let us not be undisciplined. Let us not be unprepared. Let's watch our section of the beach. So how do you identify where your beach is? 3 simple thoughts on that. First of all, you need to follow your training. The lifeguard follows his training. For us, what that means is not what a lifeguard might do in terms of physical exercise and swimming and conditioning and readiness and things. But there's still some things that we can recognize in terms of our training. First of all, live a Christ-centered life. Be disciplined in the Lord. Walk with the Lord. Know the Lord so that you know how to respond. Know the Lord. Know the Scriptures so you know how to share a message of hope. Know where God is at work in your life and through your life so that you are able to testify about the Christ that you are walking with and know and love. Live a Christ-centered life. Second of all, to follow your training means that you should be equipping and strengthening yourself for service. Don't let it happen just haphazardly, but to be dedicated and be committed to growing in Christ, in, building your life in prayer, building your life in the Scriptures, learning anything you can learn about how to share your faith or how to be a rescuer in people's lives. There's so much that we can do to equip ourselves and prepare ourselves. And so go out and do some of that work so that when you're needed, you're ready. And I think the third thing you can do in the area of your own training is ask the question, what has life taught you? What have you already learned? What are your hobbies and your strengths? And how can you utilize those for the purpose of the gospel? If you have an interest in something, is there a way that you could leverage that to connect with some other people that have a similar interest? Is there a way to use that to get to know some people that you could spend time through your hobbies, your interests, the areas where you kind of live your life? Is there a way that you can use those things and leverage those things for the kingdom of God? Second of all, what has life taught you in the area of pain and suffering? We all have pain and suffering. We all have trials. We all have struggles. But there's a phrase in recovery that God will never waste a hurt. God can actually use your pain, your hurts, even your failures in a way that brings glory and honor to Him. God can use what you've gone through and cause that to be an encouragement to somebody else, to be a guide for somebody else, to say, this is what I found in Jesus Christ. Maybe He has something for you. When I was going through that thing, this is how Jesus picked me up. Who have you lost in your life? What sins have you struggled with in your life? What pain have you felt in your life? And is there a way that God would use that to help you define your beach? Because you are specifically trained to speak into that issue and make an impact. Thinking of my aunt and uncle that had a son go to prison, and it was a really shocking thing for the whole family. And they never saw this coming, but they have turned their lives into an opportunity to ministry because of it. And they have met so many other parents in a similar situation. And they have been a blessing and witness to so many other inmates, because since they were there, they thought they would use this as an opportunity to share Christ. It has been an incredible pain in their life, and has been the most effective ministry they've ever done. God can use where you've been to be a guide for somebody else. So follow your training. It'll help you identify your beach. Second thing is we can ask, where are we assigned? What beach are we being assigned to? We have a family member that when I was writing this was in the hospital and not doing well, and was probably only had a few years left, maybe down to months left in his life. As I was rereading and revising yesterday, he was down to days. And even last night, down to hours, and then this morning I got the message that he's passed. What was interesting was, obviously as a family member, I was burdened for this. I'm a bit tattletale, just a little bit of my wife. She was so burdened for him and his family. And she said, we got to go to the hospital. We got to get down to the hospital. And she's bugging me all morning. Let's get over there. And I said, well, do you want to do this? This is for, no, let's go to the hospital. And actually on the way, we got a phone call that if you want to see him, you better get here quick. We don't know. And at that point, we were able to see him. He woke up. He knew exactly who I was. He said, hi, Carrie. We prayed with him and the family and those kinds of things. But in reflecting upon that, actually even just this morning, for whatever reason, I noticed Sandy was specifically burdened for his soul and his situation. And I think God leads us in our life. And he puts people on our hearts. He brings us into opportunities and situations. God assigns us a beach. And said, you know what? Don't worry about everything. Don't worry about that. But I'm going to call you. And we'll see how God did this with Paul in a moment. But where's God assigned you? What opportunity is in your field of view? And that's the last thing, is who is in your field of view? Who is around you? Who is in front of you? What calling might God place on your life because that person is there? You might have a coworker that you find out suddenly they're going through a divorce, or suddenly they have had a loss in their family, or suddenly they've run into a whole bunch of problems that they didn't see coming, or their kids are in trouble, and maybe it's a family member that goes through a hard time or something, and you're there, you're in that moment. Suddenly they are in your field of view. Is it possible that God has just brought them into your beach? And on the beach, people kind of walk to and fro, and they come in, and when they're in your section and they're in your field of view, it's an opportunity for you to keep your eyes open to see if there's something you might do to watch over them in that moment. I am not going to get done today. Number 2 of part 1. Let's pick it up. People matter to God. The mission matters to God, and we're still on the why. Mission matters to God, but people matter to God. One time, this was years ago, I took a group of youth students to a water park. And there was about 50 of them, so we had a bus and several cars to get them all there. We had a great time. End of the day, I'm trying to speed this up. We counted heads. We had everybody accounted for, and we walk out to the vehicles. This one particular girl stopped to tie her shoe on the walk out, and by the time she stood back up, we were gone. And because we had dropped them all off at the front and then went and parked, she didn't even know where the vehicles were in this massive parking lot. On top of that, a couple of the kids had changed seats, and so when we got everybody and we recounted, we just got the math wrong and the faces wrong, and we didn't even realize in that moment that she wasn't on the bus. She wasn't on my bus where she was supposed to be. So we drive the 45 minutes home. We get everybody dropped off. This is maybe 2.5 hours down the road. I drive up in front of her house and said, "Teresa, your house." And the kids, the last remaining few kids, said, "Teresa's not on the bus." Exactly. And I thought, oh no. And it's like, I knew exactly what had happened, right? I'm kind of hoping she's in another car, but I knew they were full. And I thought, and I'm thinking, where is she? Is she okay? How do I explain this to her dad? By the time we found her, it was another couple hours later. And some phone calls. I had to talk to security out there. We found out what happened. The police brought her home because that was the only way to make a ride, to get her a ride. And so now I've got to talk to the police. I mean, it was a mess. And you know, it's awful, horrible. Even when I still think about it, I just, how in the world did I let this happen, right? You know, what's interesting is that it didn't matter that 49 of those kids got home. It didn't matter that thousands of other teenagers over the years I have successfully got home. What mattered was that I forgot one. And that's what Jesus is saying in his illustration. It didn't matter that there's all the other sheep were still there. There was one that was missing. It didn't matter that the other coins were there. It was the one that was missing. It didn't matter that the father had the rest of his family there. It was the one that was missing. People matter to God, and sometimes it's so easy for us just to care about who's already been rescued, who's already in the family, who's already here. It's so easy for us to sit and, we can pay the lights this month. Oh, we got a full room today. The worship was really great today. Oh, we've got classes and everybody's enjoying. We can sit around looking at each other, feeling really good about what we've done. But where's the heart of the Father? What is God concerned about? What did Jesus come and die on the cross for? I can tell you it wasn't so that we'd have a freshly coated parking lot or a brand new roof or anything else that we just can work so hard on and give so much to the neglect of those that are still missing and lost. People matter to God. And people matter to us. When we understand the heart of the Father, our heart begins to break for the brokenness that's in the world. And so let's see what we can do to make a difference. Third is the reward matters to God. In each story, there is a celebration that takes place when what was lost is suddenly found. There was a rescue, there was a reconciliation, and that was followed by joy and a great celebration. The reward is worth the work. And I'm spending a little time on all this because I want to tell you I'm hoping to inspire you, but I'm hoping to inspire me. I want to take it up a notch in what it looks like to share my faith, my hope, my joy in Jesus Christ with somebody else this year. And I'm reminded of the reward of all the work and the reward when it gets uncomfortable or difficult. You know, without the shepherd, those sheep were in real danger. To remain lost, to fall into some kind of a trap or rock formation, to be eaten by wild beasts. I mean, what could happen to those sheep without the protection of their shepherd? Or the coin that was lost. How is that woman going to provide for her family? How is she going to make it when she's got her money budgeted out and she only hasn't so much? What is she going to do when the cupboards go bare? It's devastating. This father that loses his son, you know, he laid at night awake wondering what had happened and if he's okay. And so the great joy that took place when they were rescued, when everything was found and everything was back in the family and all was good for all eternity. What a great joy there is. Now, so Donna LeClaire, I'm setting this up here for you, Donna. Donna LeClaire and I were talking in the hallway this week about one of the Our Daily Bread devotions. And I appreciate the other story we had talked about was that when she was younger, she had a dentist appointment and like a bridge or some work done, and it cost her several $100s at that time, $300 or $400, which this was years and years ago. I did some math on it, and today it'd be probably almost $3,000 worth of work. And she couldn't afford it, so she's making little payments, $10 payments every month that she could. One day the dentist pulled her into the office, and she's kind of, I know, I'm paying what I can. And the dentist says, no, I'm going to write off the debt. And I don't know, if you've had somebody do that for you, but every one of us has had a God that has written off that debt for us. The debt of sin that none of us could pay. And so he sent his son to die on the cross and gave us the free gift of salvation through Jesus Christ. We have something glorious to share. And because there's a great reward that's available to others that would receive that message and put their faith and their life in the hands of Jesus Christ. Okay, so now we're going to actually get to our scripture. Let's move this along. A little bit of the why. This is such a big topic. A little bit of the why. Let's talk a little bit more on the how. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Let's go there. It's a portion of the letter from Paul to the church at Corinth. We read a different portion last week. And Paul is talking to them, and he shares actually a message with them about how he evangelized, how he did his work when he came to this city, what he did. And so I thought, well, it seems helpful to look at what Paul said he did. How did Paul do this work of sharing his faith, of evangelizing the community? Remember, he's a guy that led people to Jesus Christ, planted and grew churches, raised up disciples all over the Mediterranean area. Okay, the way he did it, it seems like it would be helpful to take a look. So here in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1, it says this, And I, when I came to you, this is Paul talking to the brothers and sisters of that church in Corinth, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and the power of God, so that your faith might not rest on the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. And I want to glean a couple things from this in asking the question, how can we speak up? What does that look like? And I thought that this does such a masterful job of disassembling all kinds of structures and approaches and plans. There's no end to learning tricks and tips and ways to evangelize and reach people. And I thought this makes it accessible. Number one, you can speak up because of God's leading. Similar to what we've already said, similar to what Donna was just sharing about her smoking buddy back in the day. Similar to what I'm sharing about how Sandy felt yesterday. Just following the leading of God. I found it interesting in verse 2, Paul said, I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ. Wasn't a big plan here. Wasn't a strategy. He didn't go in and figure out ways to work the town, find the right people, get the network in place. He didn't have hundreds of dollars to set up marketing campaigns and figure out how to how to bring people with him. And they say today in the United States, the average church plant spends $250,000 the first year to start a church plant, and only one out of, I think, 8 survive. Paul didn't have any of that. Now, not that we shouldn't learn as much as we can learn and do the best we can. I'm not saying strategies and ideas are wrong, but Paul just said, I came with Jesus Christ. He didn't come boldly. He didn't come as a guy that was kind of on, he didn't say he's really on, he's on fire, but he wasn't like one of those, really passionate, outgoing, charismatic, preaching types that just could light up the whole city with a few verses and words. He just said, I just came with a sense that Jesus is with me. I just came wanting to share with you what I found in him. I'm watching where he's at work and where he's leading, and I'm just along with Jesus trying to make an impact for him. I wonder how sometimes we've just made it so complicated. We've read endless books and gone through hours and hours of training. We've heard sermon after sermon, and the fruit, where's the fruit? Have we really talked to any more people about Christ than after we did all that? I love Bill Hybels' book called Just Walk Across the Room. That's what the book's about. He says, just walk across the room. Just find somebody and take Jesus with you. This week for me, the most convincing part of this, my own study in writing this message, was when Paul said he came to the church in Corinth with weakness, fear, and trembling. And in fact, it said much trembling. He came with weakness. He came not knowing what was going to happen. He came not knowing if it was going to work. He came knowing that Corinth was a wealthy city. It was a coastal city. It was an influential city. It was a political city. And he's coming in that. I'm just one guy, and I was terrified. And yet he changed the course of the city because he brought Jesus with him. And I thought, that challenges me. I don't want to give in to my weakness. I don't want to give in to my trembling. I don't want to give in to my fear. I'm going to try to be bolder this year. Like somebody wrote this, the 3 C's of evangelism. You cannot convince, you cannot convict, and you cannot convert. We just show up with Jesus and watch for his leading and let him use it for his glory. Number two, you can speak up because of God's grace. We have been forgiven much. Because Paul said, I came with Jesus Christ. He said, I came with Jesus Christ and him crucified. That was his message. And he'd go into the tabernacle and he'd tell them about Jesus and him crucified. And if they listened, he would share. And if they didn't, he'd leave and he'd look for somebody else who'd listen. In fact, it was in Corinth where Paul finally said, that's it. I'm no longer going to the Jews. I'm going to the Gentiles. You don't want to listen anymore because you don't want to hear what God has done for you. You don't want to understand the forgiveness that you have. And he declares that the cross was foolishness to the Jews. And I think a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. They weren't getting it. They weren't understanding. They didn't understand what he was saying. But Paul said, that's what I'm about. My message is just Jesus Christ and him crucified. It's back to Donna's story about the dentist part, where the dentist just gave up that debt. If you've ever been given up a debt or given something special like that, or somebody helped you in a moment of need, especially when there was nothing else you could do about it. Even as simple, I don't know if you've ever been stranded alongside the road with a dead battery in your car and somebody came at the right time and helped you get going. Isn't it so easy to tell that story of blessing and how you were taken care of and helped? Understand what God has done for you and simply share that story because it's full of grace and goodness and his love for all people. Third, you can speak up because of God's blessings. Paul said, hey, I wasn't trying to be bold. I wasn't trying to be powerful. I wasn't trying to use persuasive speeches. I wasn't trying to do any of that. You know what I was trying to do? To show that God is with us. God is with you. God wants to do a work in your life. Verse 4, Paul said, it was not my message, it was the power of God at work. It was not what I said, but it was able to show you in the power of God. My speech and my message were not plausible words of wisdom, he said. I wasn't trying to convince you. I laid out some truth about Jesus Christ, and then I wanted to show you that he's here. In other words, Paul's saying it's not my ability to convince you or turn you to Jesus with my words, but it was the evidence of his power and his presence at work in and through my life. He preached to them. He told them the story with fear and trembling, but then he just was able to show them that God was with him. Paul said, I was just obedient. I trusted God. I swallowed my fear. I did my best just to share Jesus and let him show up and do his work. Now, how can we show demonstrations of the Spirit and the power of God through our lives? Number one, through how we're changed. Look at how Paul was changed from the guy that murdered Christians to a guy that was building, probably the most influential person in building God's church. God changed his life. Do people see how your life is changing because you're in a relationship with Jesus Christ? Do they see that you're a new creation? Do they see that you handle things in life differently? Because maybe you pray before making a decision. Or maybe you show kindness when you want to show anger. Or maybe you show grace and mercy when somebody doesn't deserve it. Maybe you're showing joy and strength and purpose with your life that they haven't seen before. How has Jesus Christ changed you, and how are you showing that to others? Second of all, we can show demonstration by how we're blessed. We're blessed with joy. We're blessed with strength. We're blessed with wisdom. We have a purpose for our life. God is doing so much work at it. We are so blessed to walk with the Lord. And third, you can show your witness. We can show the power of God at work. Sometimes it's small ways and sometimes it's big ways. And we find those stories and we share them with others. I was talking with a friend of mine. He's a pastor over in the Seattle area. I was talking to him actually just this week. And during the Christmas season, all their pastors take the week between Christmas and New Year's off. He's in a large church, and they take that week off and shut down the church. And so he stayed home and was doing some bathroom renovation. Yeah, a lot of fun. Great time to. He said, but it's a good time of year because all these construction workers are not working, and he can actually get them to come over and get something done. So he's working on this, and he got word that one of the guys that he knew from the church went to the hospital. And at first he thought, well, I'm off this week, and I'm right in the middle of this. I don't know. But it was just really this impression on his heart. He thought he should go to the hospital and find out how he was doing. God brought him onto his beach. So he goes to check it out, and just as he gets to the hospital, he's walking down the hall, and all of a sudden, the nurse and his wife, the man's wife, are rushing out of the room, and others are rushing into the room, and there's this intense conversation going on down the hall, and he didn't have any idea what it was about, but he could tell that something was wrong. He said, this doesn't look too good. So he held back for a few minutes, and they finished up. The doctor goes inside, and he goes down to meet with the wife, and she says, I don't know what's going on, but they're losing him. And so he was just struggling what to do, and he stood out in the hallway and waited for a little bit, and he was really lost. And then a thought came to his mind. He says, do I really believe what I preach? And he just was convicted to start praying. And that came over him. He started praying. I don't know if he stayed in the hallway or I think he did. I think he stayed just outside the room. And this went on for 10, 15 minutes. And then there was more rushing. He didn't know what was going on again. People were coming and going. And the doctor met with the wife again. And this time he could just kind of hear. He was just in earshot to kind of hear what he said. And he said, I don't know what to tell you, but he's going to be okay. And the doctor noticed, he said, ever since that guy showed up, his health changed. It's a miracle. Doctors don't throw that word around often. And my friend, obviously, certainly in his humility, just said, he just knew it was the power of prayer and what God was going to do in this situation. God doesn't answer like that as immediate every time. But this time he did. And the doctors, they thought he was gone, and they couldn't understand why he suddenly came back. And they directly connected it to something that happened when he showed up. It was the power of God. It gave a wife her husband back. Power of God that sets the addicted free. It takes the captive and loosens the chains. It restores joy to those that are downtrodden and hurting. The power of God that takes and breaks the stronghold of pain in a heart. And we can see that work in people's lives when we believe and when we trust and when we hang on to him and we watch for his work. And we're able to share that story and share what God is doing in us and around us and through us to others. So I'm not telling you have to believe different. I'm not telling you what you have to do different. I'm not telling you, all I know is the power of God. I've seen it. I'm living in it. Maybe you might want that too. Let's pray.